Good morning, YouTubians. Thank you for joining me again. Today we're going to review a band called Arditi, a Swedish band from Linköping, Sweden. They perform a certain kind of music called martial industrial music. Now, many of you may be familiar with this type of music. It basically consists of various topics revolving around battle, war, honor, blood, war, defeat, victory, triumph, heroism, triumph, carnage, identity, pride, national identity, cultural identity, racial identity, heritage, anti-globalization, and tradition. I think I may have said a couple things twice in there, but you get the idea. Now, martial industrial is kind of an acquired taste. There are various bands that stand out in the genre. Lager des Heils is one of my personal favorites. Arditi, who we will be talking about today, from Sweden. Orplid, and another band called HERR. It's a very interesting genre if you get into it. If you're a fan of industrial music, it shouldn't be much of a leap. And also, if you're into neo-folk music, there is a lot of overlapping territory between the two genres. So anyhow, today we're going to review 3 albums by Arditi in rapid succession. The first one is called Leading the Iron Resistance. It was released this year, as a matter of fact. The album consists of horns, strings, marching drums, organs, samples, speeches, samples of speeches, sound bites. It's basically the musical equivalent of the hard, heroic sculpture of Thorak. If you don't know who Thorak is, research it, look it up, check it out. The engines of war are more of a score. What I mean by that is a lot of this album consists of keyboards and strings and horns and samples that sound like they could have been kind of like from Triumph of the Will or some other source from World War II. Kind of has that old feel to it, which is kind of neat. A lot of the songs, I find difficulty in finding where the song begins and where the sample ends, or vice versa. The song Volunteers is a good example of that. There are some good industrial beats here and there, but for the most part it is kind of like a score. Military Virtue is a quality track here, as well as a song called Forging a New Man, which kind of touches on a lot of Indo-European themes. This album does not seem like a glorification of war, but rather a glorification of the warrior ethos. Not the war itself, but those engaged in the war or preparing for the struggle. This is from the general's standpoint, as opposed to the guy in the trenches, lobbing grenades and firing their guns and jabbing their bayonets at people. I thought the album was all right. But in comparison to the other albums, I don't think it really stood up. I felt the compositions were kind of dull in places, kind of stretched out too long, and there's a song called Fanen, which I felt like kind of just dragged on forever. I give this album a 2.5 out of 5. Now, moving on. We go back in the time machine to 2003, and we check out Arditi's album, Marching On to Victory. Now, the theme is pretty obvious by the title itself, but to give you an idea, other songs titles include Unity of Blood, Determination, Bless Our Arms, and Militant Struggle. This has more to do with the battle itself, I feel. The primitive compositions kind of appeal to that visceral quality to the fans of martial industrial music. I think that if you kind of forget about what all the PC people may say about fascism, blah, 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 I think that martial industrial, when it is at its strongest or finest, is more of an empowering type of music, and it makes you feel confident in your abilities. When I listen to this music, I think of the opening to Conan, when they're showing the polishing of the steel and preparing the broadsword for battle. You know, this is red-blooded, just testosterone type stuff. It's very nice. There's a very distinct formula. It's kind of hit or miss. There are a lot of rallying cries and pep talks here and there and speeches in various languages. I feel like they're really assembling the troops and getting the engines of war fired up again and gearing up for glory and perhaps another crusade. The problem is it's very hit or miss. You're either kind of gleefully hypnotized, or you're just kind of succumbing to this plodding boredom. Anyway, I think it's a stronger effort than leading the Iron Resistance, so I give Marching On to Victory a solid 3. Now, the third review of Arditi is The Spirit of Sacrifice, going back to 2005. Now, again, if we look at the album titles, we get an idea of thematically where we're going. Religion of the Blood, Spirit of Sacrifice, and The Measures of Our Age. This album has a lot to do with tribalism. What I see as kind of a war of genetics, a preservation of bloodlines, almost like the Kwisatz Haderach or something like that. This album seems to strike a balance between the marching rhythms of Marching On to Victory and the cinematic feel of the Iron Resistance, which I think is really nice. There's a lot of dark ambience and atmosphere throughout this album, and I think this is easily the most successful of the 3 Arditi albums that I have reviewed, and I give this album a 3.5 out of 5. I hope this encourages you to check out more martial industrial music, and I would definitely say Arditi is a good place to start. Thank you.